And so, ladies and gentlemen, feel most welcome in the studio. And I have a very short video here. And the video tells us on the system that the World Bank has been using, which is not working. The immigration from Africa to America currently will not solve the problems of Africa. So, I want you to take one moment and watch this video. It might change how you are thinking about finding jobs abroad.
Some people say that mass immigration into the United States can help reduce world poverty. Is that true? Well, no, it's not. And let me show you why. This gumball represents the 1 million legal immigrants that the United States has taken every year on average since 1990. Now, who in the world deserves our humanitarian compassion? The World Bank has one measure of the desperately poor of the world. They make less than $2 a day. And how many people make less than $2 a day in the world? Well, let's start with Africa. In Africa alone, there are 650 million people who make less than $2 a day. 650 million. And in India, another 890 million people, desperately poor. China adds another 480 million people, making less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, the rest of Asia has a heartbreaking 810 million people who the World Bank says make less than $2 a day. And finally, there's 105 million of Latin America's population that are desperately poor. All told, the World Bank says there are 3 billion people in the world, 3 billion people who are desperately poor, making less than $2 a day. That's 3,000 gumballs. And every year, we take 1 million and suggest that we've somehow made a humanitarian difference. Of course, we don't pull our immigrants from these desperately poor populations, do we? These people are too poor, too sick, too disconnected to make it here as immigrants. We tend to pull our immigrants out of the better off poor of the world. And Mexico tends to define the type of immigrant that we bring here because the plurality of people come from Mexico. And Mexico is poor. How many people in the world live in countries that have average incomes lower than that of Mexico? And the World Bank tells us that that number is these 3 billion plus another 2.6 billion people. 5.6 billion people in the world who live in countries with average incomes below that of Mexico. That's 5,600 gumballs. And so what is it that the elites are telling us? They're telling us that when we take this 1 million immigrants, that we somehow or another are tackling world poverty. And we have to do it regardless of the effect on our unemployed, the working poor, the most vulnerable members of our society, regardless of the effect on our natural resources. Even if we went by the most radical proposals in Washington, which are to actually double our immigration to 2 million a year, which would totally overwhelm our physical, natural, and social infrastructures, we couldn't make a noticeable difference. And we may be really hurting the impoverished people of the world because the million that we do take are among the most energetic, often the better educated, certainly the most dissatisfied people that if they did not immigrate would be the agents for change to improve the lot of all the people in these countries. The true heroes in the global humanitarian field are the people in these countries who have the wherewithal to immigrate to another country, but instead stay in their countries, to apply their skills to help their fellow countrymen. Unfortunately, our immigration system tends to entice these very type of people to abandon their countrymen. The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished populations. And this year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. And next year, you can be quite sure that Congress, unless stopped by the American voters, will bring in another 1 million immigrants. And these countries, unfortunately, will be adding another 80 million people into these impoverished nations. We could take 5 million a year, but we'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries. Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that. They have to bloom where they're planted. The only place that 99.9% of these people can be helped is where they live. Let's help them there.
The first question we need to ask ourselves as Africans is what is the cause of poverty? What causes us to be poor? Because before Africa was colonized, we did not know the notion about poverty. So what brought about poverty in Africa? You see, and the fact that we have gone through the education system and people have knowledge, have the reason as to why they have started economics. So many people knows about money, so many people knows about, success and other things. We are largely and heavily empowered. What is then this that is causing Africa and other sub-Saharan countries to be poor? Why do we, like in Kenya, people think, according to the picture that is painted in Kenya, people think, oh, Kenya, we have many people who are rich, you see. But we can evidently see that we have only about 1% of the Kenyan population who are leading this nation. So my very genesis concern, about yeah, so my very genesis concern about this story about poverty is that what causes poverty? Why all of a sudden people are believing that traveling to United States, to UK, to India, to China, and Lebanon, Qatar, that's where they can find peace and find money and find the avenues to prosper and achieve their dreams. Like what is this? What came in our mind all of a sudden that we have we neglect our countries, hatutaki kukaa kwa nchi yetu, we want to live somewhere where we can speak English, where we can see the airport, see the planes. What came all of a sudden in our mind? Why have we, like in Africa, people don't like building their nation? And what happened? Because initially Africa was colonized, and when Africans woke up, they decided, today we're gonna let the white people out of our nation. We're gonna render the colonies out of our land. Then you decided all of most African countries, like in Kenya, they received their independence in 1963. So why did you want to chase the English or the British out of the land? When you wanted the land, you wanted the freedom, you wanted the democracy, and when they left, all these things were left for you. Democracy, freedom, land, resources were plenty for you. So the question is, where did this poverty came from? You see, where do we have, interclans conflict when the only enemy we had was the British, the colonies? What happened all of a sudden? So I think this is a question we need to ask. So before we talk about migration, before we talk about poverty in Africa, we need to ask ourselves, why did you send the British away? Because you thought they are taking your land, and the land was left for you, and you cannot use your land. Now you are poor, you are wallowing, you don't know what, you have no food, you have to buy food, your GDP is growing down, we depend from, there's inflation, we depend from other countries to eat. You see, it's a big question. Okay, we have a very powerful education system. We had 7623, we had 844, now we have the new CBC program. Now we ask yourself a question now. 844 was, when I was reading about the foundation or the fundamentals of the 844, this was to produce workers, employees, which people were largely empowered to work, not to use the knowledge to create. You see? Now, we ask ourselves a question. Do you think CBC is going to help Africa or Kenya? Big question. Now, this 844 system, it was purported to produce employees. Did you think about industries, companies, technology, growth? So, if this education does not lead to the richness, realization of our resources, and the production of food, the security of food, and the progress and development of Africa. If this education does not lead to development, then which kind of education do we have? That's not my concern. My main concern, what are the political and political class and politicians and leaders of Africa and Kenya doing for this question? You see, so it is a continuous, problem which is going to be used to keep most people down. So if you listen from this video and you still remain the same person, I think the education or the information you're put in your mind is not really functional. So we need to detoxicate ourselves from some kind of information and some kind of belief that somehow, some way, somebody is going to come for a rescue. It is us, it is you who is supposed to realize the problem and be the solution of that problem. If you're going to realize that, then I think we will have a lot of problems. And this, our very land, do you know what? Right now, as Ruto is trying as much as possible to endorse his agendas, recently he launched Eldoret to be one of the cities in Kenya. And we don't know how is that going to help. I don't know. But now we have a housing program, which purports that it's going to help us on what? You see, it's going to help us on what? When you have affordable houses. So what does that mean to a common Kenyan? It means, do you know Kericho? Kericho watu wanakaa kwa vikundi fulani and then they have left hizo matunyumba wanakaa, tunyumba tumejengwa na wazungu. Na the rest of the land wazungu wameichukua, wanalima chai. And ile grade mzuri ya chai na produced in Kericho is not sold in Kenya. It's sold in those developed countries. You see. Now, the question is, affordable houses, which means people watatoka kwa mashamba zao wakuje wakae kwa affordable housing, which watalipa, si ndio? So mkilipa hizo nyumba, land yenu inatumika na corporations which are going to control your farming, which means food security is already bad. So what is that has to tell you as a Kenyan? People need to reduce rural-urban migration and start using your land, cultivate your land, because it is going to be taken and new colonialism is coming, is actually knocking on the door. If we have people who believe that traveling to working from US or from Lebanon or from other developed countries, that this is going to solve Kenyan problem, you are living in a dream, and now we need to wake up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.